Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Ezpeleta, and I'm the Senior Gender Advisor for the Extractive Industries Program at Oxfam. I'm excited and honored for this opportunity to be part of your learning journey around gender in mining. I would like to extend much gratitude and congratulations to the Intergovernmental Forum on Mining, Minerals, Metals, and Sustainable Development, the United Nations Development Program, and everyone who made this fantastic resource and training curriculum possible. For those of you who may not know, Oxfam is an international non-government organization. Our mission is very simple. Together with our partners, we fight every day the injustice of poverty all around the world. Oxfam believes that poverty is not inevitable. It's the result of the intentional and unintentional ways that power is wielded and distributed in the world. So fighting inequality and social injustice is critical for eliminating poverty. We also recognize that gender is one of the key factors determining whether someone will be poor. It's no coincidence that the majority of the world's poor are women and girls. Gender is a main predictor of who will be poor and who will have power in our world today. And that's why eliminating poverty depends on advancing gender equality. In this lesson, you learned about the historical underpinnings of gender inequality in the mining sector and how these continue to manifest today. You also learned about the various ways that mining operations impact women, girls, men and boys in local communities, and about various tools you can use to assess this. At Oxfam, we are very excited to see some of our resources and tools, like our Gender Impact Assessment Guide, featured in this course. We are also greatly inspired by seeing the tremendous interest from all of you in taking this training, which demonstrates the growing acknowledgement that advancing gender equality is a critical component of successful mining governance. But it hasn't always been this way. 20 years ago, when Oxfam first started to work on gender issues in the extractive sector, there was very little awareness that the impacts of mining were gendered, or women and girls disproportionately bore the negative effects of mining projects. It has taken a lot of efforts over many years by many actors to raise awareness and build an evidence base. And only recently have we started to better understand the specific gender-based barriers that women and the organizations that represent them face when trying to participate in mining governance, and particularly in decisions around how revenues from mining are used. I'd like to share some of these new findings with you and talk about the ways in which civil society and development practitioners can support the meaningful participation in women's rights organizations in mining. As background, it might be helpful to understand Oxfam's approach and programmatic priorities of our work in the extractive sector. As a rights-based organization, we share the global belief that governments have the obligation to respect, protect, and fulfill people's rights, and that companies have the responsibility to respect human rights as well. We also believe that people should have the power to seek accountability from government and companies for these obligations. When it comes to mining and other extractive industries, Oxfam focuses on two main rights: the right to know and the right to decide. Our focus on the right to decide centers on the legal right to free, prior, and informed consent. It's about ensuring that local communities, who are often indigenous communities, have sufficient information and opportunity to participate in decisions about whether extractive projects go ahead. In many instances, local communities only find out about a mining project once the decision has already been made. The right to know is about transparency and accountability. It's about ensuring the transparency and disclosure of extractive industry information, like contracts and revenue flows. So, for example, what's in the deals that are made between governments and companies? How much money is flowing from companies to governments, and how is government spending this money? It also includes environmental information around monitoring and incident reporting, for example. Historically, there's been a tremendous amount of opacity around this type of information, and not having this information in the public domain makes it extremely difficult for citizens to seek accountability from government and companies for any negative impacts caused by extractive projects, and also accountability for the use of mining revenues, how these revenues are being invested or not in public goods and services. A key idea underlining this is that the potential contribution of mining is not just about economic growth, but is a vehicle for pro-poor, pro-gender equality development through the revenues it generates. Governments can and should invest in services that specifically support women's rights and gender equality, such as maternal health care centers, water and sanitation systems, and programs to address gender-based violence. Oxfam's work to advance these rights hinges on the idea of active citizenship. We believe that citizens empowered with information, effective ways to communicate their message, and access to decision makers can drive accountability of governments and mining companies. Some of the specific tactics and tools we use to galvanize this type of social accountability are information campaigns, community scorecards, and processes like participatory budgeting. But a really big challenge of this work has been around ensuring the meaningful participation of women from mining impacted communities and women's rights organizations. Remember that meaningful participation isn't about numbers. It's not just about having women in the room or around the table. UN Women defines women's meaningful participation as women exercising agency, voice, and leadership to influence decision-making and affect change. And this type of participation is not possible unless there are also receptive decision-making environments that adequately consider and address women's interests. Without this, women and women's rights organizations may have little influence over decisions about compensation, employment, benefit sharing, and how mining revenues are spent. A few years ago, we set out to learn more about barriers inhibiting the participation of locally impacted women and women's rights organizations in decision-making around mining and the use of mining revenues. While broad-based participation can be difficult to foster regardless of gender, we were specifically looking at gender-based barriers particularly to women because of their gender role and by extension to women's rights organizations. We also focused on intersecting forms of marginalization, so how race, indigenous status, age, location, and other factors might come into play. Additionally, we wanted to understand what society and other actors could do to help address such barriers and better support participation. Much of what we learned in this study can be applied more generally, whether you are in the mining industry, a government actor, development practitioner, or part of civil society. The lessons can be applied in your own efforts to foster more meaningful participation. And many of the results will be familiar to you because of what you learned in the lesson. First, sociocultural and gender norms. Mining continues to be viewed as a man's issue. Women living in mining-affected communities may themselves not be interested in participating in mining governance because they don't perceive it as within their role, or they may not be aware of their own rights to participate. There's also a fear of disrupting cultural norms. Project proponents, governments, and others may be hesitant to encourage women's participation because it might be perceived as interfering in local culture or undermining traditional leadership hierarchies. Gender norms might also restrict women's ability to move around freely and safely, and women may not be able to participate in public arenas at all. In your lesson, you also learned about women's double and even triple role of work: unpaid care work, paid work, and work to support the community. This time poverty linked to gender roles and responsibilities came out in our research as well as a structural barrier. Another roadblock to women's participation is the fact that many women may not have legal ownership of or control over land and other resources. This immediately sidelines women from many negotiations. Another example is if travel is necessary to participate. It might cost money, time, transportation, or other resources that women may not have. A third major barrier is the accessibility of information. In today's world, information about mining projects and revenues may often only be available online and on the internet. Women, especially Indigenous or other women in rural areas where mining happens, may not be able to access the internet or other mainstream media. Language and literacy can also be structural hurdles. Lastly, consultation processes may not be designed in gender-responsive ways. They might not be designed to adequately support and promote women's participation. Outreach may only target heads of households, normally men, view the community as a homogeneous unit, or incorrectly assume that women are able to participate in public forums. So what can we do to address these barriers and better support participation? There are many practical steps we can take. We can design more gender-responsive consultation and accountability processes. We can think about the time, location, and accessibility of meetings. We can make information more transparent and accessible by using more locally appropriate mediums and languages. We can also support communities and women in building awareness of their rights and in fostering transformative changes in gender norms that promote gender equality. And we can invest in women's rights organizations. You've already been learning about these and other ways to consider gender in your assessment processes and all along the mining value chain. And in the coming lessons, you will learn about and practice using tools to help strengthen your skills at gender analysis and in designing your gender strategy. More broadly, however, there are also many ways we can support positive change. We can be advocates to promote the participation of women and women's rights organizations in mining government. We can use our access to decision makers, to legislators, to corporations and multilateral institutions to help establish accountable policies and practices that advance women's rights and gender equality. We can be connectors, bringing various stakeholders together, building strategic alliances between women's rights organizations and mining governance actors. From boardrooms to local communities to the mines themselves, we can and we must engage men and boys. We can also invest in research and in developing tools and gathering gender disaggregated data, and in our own organizational and institutional capacities and those of our peers and partners. We can amplify the voices and leadership of women and women's rights organizations, providing access to information, resources, and political capital. We can level the playing field and power differentials between companies, governments, and local communities to ensure that the most impacted by extractive have a say in decision making. And importantly, we can listen and learn. Listen to what works and learn from what doesn't. We cannot afford to lose hard-earned gains for gender equality by becoming complacent, by accepting the status quo, and by not challenging harmful gender norms that disempower women and put everyone's rights at risk. In everything we do, we must ask, where are the women and which women? Ultimately, this is how we will drive progress towards gender equality and advance women's rights through and within mining governance. Thanks for listening.